You finalized your projections. They're up on the site right now. Who at the quarterback position stands out the most, or who are the top three most obvious values? And let's start with the first one. I'll just say the name, and we're aligned on it. It's Jayden Daniels. We just talked about some of the things that you've struggled with the most, which is projecting games played and rookie projecting rookies. And this player, I think, qualifies for both, because the counter argument I keep hearing is, oh, he's too skinny, he's only going to play 8 games, whatever. But according to Diana Rossini and based on Jayden Daniels' pro day, he's 5 pounds heavier, 5 to 10 pounds heavier than Lamar Jackson is right now.
Yeah, this is I tried everything I could to get Daniels not be as high in the rankings by the end of this, and it's just impossible. It's not. There's no world where Cliff Kingsbury is his offensive coordinator and he's not a top. I have him at QB7. I think that even could be a little low. Like, I don't. It's a super tight tier there in the QB5 to 8-ish range. The only way this doesn't work out for him is if he, like you said, doesn't play enough games. But that's not something we're good at predicting. So I'm not going to say this guy's only going to play 8 games. Like you said, there's just, Bryce Young only missed like one game last year, and he's the tiniest QB ever. So we just don't know with Jayden Daniels, but the upside is massive for him.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the School of Scott. I'm your host, Scott Barrett, CEO of FantasyPoints.com, and I am joined today by the great Chris Wecht, who has recently been promoted to the role of projection czar over at FantasyPoints.com. He will be taking over what John Hansen has done since we launched the site. Obviously, still, I'm going to have heavy input. John Hansen is going to have heavy input. But Chris now is taken over the projections role. That includes our season-long projections. Every single time I start a podcast, lawnmowers just magically appear right outside my window. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's like they're never to be seen or heard from unless immediately after I start recording an episode. Chris is going to be doing our season-long projections, our weekly projections. He's been doing our UFL projections for years now. We have someone else doing our college football projections, which we believe are best in the space. And Chris has a unique story in this space. We initially hired him as our charting lead over at Fantasy Points Data. And he's so unique in the sense that he's like 90% Brett Whitefield when it comes to watching film, NFL X's and O's. And then he's like 150% me when it comes to data, playing around in spreadsheets. And I thought that was my greatest skill set. And Chris is just so far and above that, programming as well. Anyway, without further ado, Chris, welcome to the School of Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to finally talk about these. I feel like I've been slaving over them for months now, really. If you count when I actually started, just with a blank spreadsheet and where to take it from there.
Chris, you want to tell the listeners at home a little bit about your background? If I understand correctly, you were a competitive ballroom dancer and antiques dealer. Is that right?
That would have been an interesting career. No football similarities there if I had started that way. But no, I started going way back before I was in this industry at all. I was an engineer, so very data heavy background. That's what I went to school for. A couple, 2 or 3 years after I finished college and was working as an engineer, I got obsessed with fantasy football, like many of us do, and wanted to just dabble in it. I spent time doing some part-time writing stuff for various companies. And then I eventually landed. Decided to try to get my foot in the door with PFF, actually doing joining their charting process. Started a year there, and that's where I eventually met Brett Whitefield, like you mentioned. And Brett ended up going to another company, and I happened to go with him there, and again do a lot of charting stuff. And then while I was there, that's really when I kind of took off from a data perspective side. Started building out different data tables that were used on the site and whatnot, and eventually Brett and I came here. And like you said, my role was mostly going to be the same, doing charting stuff, doing a lot of the back end data stuff. That's kind of how me and Brett have worked together since the beginning. He is the genius X's and O's guy, and then I know some X's and O's, but also can do a lot of data back end stuff, make our charting process actually work and spit out data.
It's such a rare skill set in this space. You know, you have the data nerds with like a malnourished BMI and like pasty pale skin, and then you have the film bros, guys who are like jacked, like Brett is like what you imagine, like former D lineman or whatever, and like there's very minimal overlap typically. You know, you're really good at film, you're really bad at stats, and vice versa. But you are one of the few people in this space who is legitimately, genuinely elite at both, and that is such an important skill set. On the data side, one thing you really helped me out a lot with is determining what exactly goes into the data suite, the best way to calculate some of these numbers. So like, why would you have a pressure rate over expectation? It's because, well, you can look at pressure rate, but that's not going to perfectly tell you which quarterbacks had the best offensive line play, because some of them overcompensate by just getting the ball out as quickly as possible. So there's a relationship between those two numbers that blah, 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 blah. But yeah, Chris, uber genius. No one I trust more when it comes to projections. Chris, by the way, is also a new father, celebrated his first Father's Day just a few days ago. Shout out to all the dads out there. I did want to segue into an important point before we get deeper into the weeds about our projections. I think what the listener at home really cares about is like, okay, who are the best values based on your projections? Who are some of the trickiest players to project? Some of the things that go into that, lessons learned, what metrics are most predictive, most variable. We'll get to that. But first, I wanted to highlight the distinction between rankings and projections. And this is something I've always went on rants about. So there's the Fantasy Pros rankings competition, right? Where all the analysts across the space compete against each other to have the most accurate projections. We're not part of that competition because it's more valuable. We won the competition, I think, like every year we entered, or Joe Dolan rather was the number one ranker from 2015 until 2020 or whenever we stopped entering that competition. So really good track record. It's just, why would we give that out for free? We're going to keep it behind the paywall. Otherwise our subscribers are going to yell at us. So that's why we don't do that. But I kind of went on a rant about it. It's like, you can't be using, because the contest is like, okay, a running back is ranked 25 by ADP and he finished 23rd. That's like a huge win that matters just about exactly the same as RB5 by ADP finishing RB3 and you having him RB. Really what that is it's like a projections contest, which is something completely different. And so I remember a few years ago, it was, according to this, Fantasy Pros rankings, James White was like the RB22 by their rankings, and by ADP it was like RB31. And so he's like, oh, this tremendous value. But my argument was, it just doesn't matter, because like, let's say James White's median projection is RB22, but like, what is his most realistic upside at this stage of his career? It's like RB20. And like, what's his downside? Maybe it's RB24, but that player is fairly worthless in a start sit league, maybe worthwhile in a best ball league, but fairly worthless in a start sit league where you have the safety net of the waiver wire to fall back on. And because upside wins championships, and because a low end RB2 at the end of the day is basically worthless for your fantasy roster. You want to go big or you want to go home. And that's how I viewed it. And so like, my ranking, what should you be drafting from? You shouldn't be drafting off of Chris's projections. You should be drafting off of my rankings, John Hanson's rankings. I'm going to have my draft guide out probably late July or early August, where that's going to have all that for you. John, even throughout the season, is going to have his rankings up on the site. And what that does is it more accurately represents a player's range of outcomes, and the fact that a player's upside is more valuable than his downside is detrimental, or at least that's the way I've been thinking about it. What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a super important distinction, and I think both projections and rankings provide value in their own ways. If you had to pick one and say you only get one of these to do your fantasy draft off of, yeah, it's going to be you do off the rankings every single time. A projection is not going to be able to capture upside like you can when you rank guys. The point of a But that doesn't mean projections are worthless. They're showing you what the most common outcome is. And if you did this, ran these seasons a million times in a simulation, this is what we expect the average outcome to be.
Is it the most common outcome or the average outcome?
The average outcome. Yeah, I guess that's slightly. Those would technically be slightly different, but it's the average outcome. But it helps frame your mind though of like what this player's range of outcomes is, and what the kind of floor is, what the ceiling could be. But it doesn't. It keeps you from going crazy with in any one direction, really, high or low. Like the James White example you used, like he fits on teams, particularly in like maybe not ever a start sit one because you only start so many guys, but like a best ball team, certainly a James White type player could matter. If you only took 3 rookie running backs before that, and you just know I just need 10 points in this, while the other guys kind of ramp up, then yeah, James White's perfect, and his projection would reflect that. Um, but yeah, so there's a clear difference between the two, and I don't think you could do rankings without looking at some form of projections first. But then ultimately, I would want to draft off the rankings, if that makes sense.
I think that was well said. We're going to quickly go to break, and then I have a few more questions for you. All right, Chris, without giving away too much of this secret sauce, can you tell me some of the things that went into your projections process? I know it's a little bit of a blend of art and science. How much art went into it? I'm guessing, kind of scouring articles from various beat writers, which I know you've done. Any like key stats that were really massively important? What went into your projections process?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff goes into it, obviously. But the key is, so the main thing that, when I started this process, that I wanted to do is making sure everything kind of balanced together. So you start at the team level, just to get your play volume and your pass splits. That kind of films the framework of, all right, this is how large the pie I have to then give out to all the skill players on the team. And then everything from that point is really from the skill player level up. So how many, the QBs is super simple. You're only so many of them are going to get dropbacks in a season, and usually it's the same guy for the entire season. Then you decide how many what's the carry share going to be for the running backs. How many routes are receivers going to run on every drop back, and kind of and then what's their target share from there, and then you're comparing their targets per out run, their yards per out run, looking at all these different things, and kind of just making sure everything is balanced, and then adds up to the final team level. So I'm not projecting how many touchdowns a team is going to score. I'm projecting how many touchdowns the players on the team are going to score, and then that gives me the team touchdowns. The point of that is that it's better to look at a player's touchdown per target rate or a touchdown per carry rate than it is to try to judge it on the team level, because a team has multiple players on it. And season to season, it's going to change in a big way. Whereas a player might be more consistent throughout his career of what kind of player he is in the NFL. Obviously, at the end, I'm still comparing and seeing what all the team final totals look like, and see if they make sense. Does anything look too high, too low compared to what that team has done in the past? But in general, I'm getting the play volume at the team level, and then everything after that is skill player efficiency and volume driven.
What if the numbers didn't sync up? What if you had a quarterback projected for 250 passing yards, and then you look at the wide receivers and you see 279 passing yards.
Yeah, so especially for season long, I allow a little bit of wiggle room there. I'm not gonna, get it to exactly 250 equals 250, but if it's you don't, you wouldn't want 250 equals 279 or whatever you said, because that's a pretty big difference. You gotta find space. You gotta find either your QB is too low or the receivers are too or have too many yards. Which is so that's really where you learn a lot doing the projections, because you learn there's just no more room. We might talk about this group later on, but like the Houston Texans wide receivers,
Exactly.
just a nightmare to try to figure this out. I mean,
like if all three meet ADP, CJ Stroud has what, 8,000 yards?
Right. It just doesn't work. Yeah, the math doesn't work. It doesn't mean any one individual is a bad pick, but the all three of them being where they are bad picks as a whole. What the most likely outcome is that two of them, maybe only one of them, is like really deserving of where they go, and then the third or the second and third guys probably should have gone a little bit later. It's going to be something like that, but the point is, Stefon Diggs has been a massive target earner his entire career, basically. We saw Nico Collins clearly take a step up last year, and then we saw a rookie Tank Dell, you could argue, outperform Nico Collins for when he was healthy. But you've got to make choices. Either Stroud should be the QB1, or some of these receivers aren't going to be as efficient as they were the year before.
What are some of the key lessons you've learned throughout this process?
So one thing I wanted to mention that I think a lot of people get wrong about projections is they treat them as this is my prediction on the most accurate outcome, but that's not really what projections are. They're your prediction on the most average outcome, like we kind of talked about earlier. You're not. It's particularly for like weekly projections. I found this particular. I probably learned this the most doing the UFL projections week to week. Is we're not trying to be the most accurate. We're trying to, on average, be the most accurate. There's a distinction there in that we don't actually know that this player is going to run for 12 carries for 50 yards and half a touchdown. But on average, that's what we think the outcome is going to happen. If we played the game a ton of times, this is where we think the number would be. We're not saying that this is the number for this game, though. So whether it's season long or weekly, you don't look at the projection as this is what we think this guy is going to finish with. We're saying this is what we think on average he's going to finish with. It could be higher, it could be lower, but on average, this is like his most average outcome. Don't get so obsessed with it being the accurate. This is the number type things. Like if you were betting season long totals, for example, you don't want to look at a guy's what I have for his receiving yardage line as that's what it's going to be. I'm saying the average outcome around 50% of the time, this is where I think his number would be. So you got to kind of change your thinking a little bit on that in terms of the accurate outcome and just the average outcome.
That is the right way to think about it. And like, that is how I think about it when I'm writing my draft guide, let's say, right? Like take a player like, I don't know, Christian Watson. Let's say like, what is his average projection? And you could say it's like 8 fantasy points per game, right? Where it's like, and it's like bottom 20 percentile is like 3 fantasy. Maybe Jayden Reed is just the new starter in 3 wide receiver sets. But like, what is his 15th percentile outcome? It's like, oh, he could wreck leagues. I think maybe Watson was a bad example, but like Kyle Pitts is another one like that. And so to me, it's coming up with those range of outcomes and then just assigning greater importance on the upside angle and how likely that is. You want players with the potential to absolutely wreck leagues. You don't want a James White, who, let's say, his range of outcomes in that season I was talking about was RB 22 to RB 26. There's just more value in that.
Yeah, Gabe Davis's projection is never going to be his actual stat line, right? Like it's either going to be near 5 points or less, or it's going to be 15 points or more. Like you don't obsess over the actual projection. It's just telling you this is on average where he would fit if you took all of his games up together. Another thing I learned, it really helps you, rein in the hype on players. Rookies in particular, they come in and everyone wants to just assume they're going to be that guy for the team. Take Lad McConkey, for example, for the Chargers. Very empty receiver room. He's going to project pretty decently because there's not a lot of guys there. But a guy like Josh Palmer is also going to project probably even better. We've seen him have success in the NFL. It really just helps you rein in the hype on any one individual player. You're not going to get out of, because you can't. There's only such a large pie you can give out, and you have to choose who you're going to give the stuff to. You can't say like Rhamondre for the Bear, like how much can you take away from Keenan Allen and DJ Moore? You can't take it all. You can't project Rhamondre to be 1,000-yard receiver in his first year, despite him probably having the talent to do so. There's just no way a projection should say that Keenan Allen or DJ Moore is going to struggle that much. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but you just can't project it that way. And then lastly, volume matters so much more than efficiency. I found that after I did like my initial run, I'm looking through the rankings, how guys ranked. There'd be spots where I think this guy, he probably should be a little bit higher. Let me check his numbers, and I would go and be like, yeah, I'm a little light on his efficiency. He was better to finish the year, whatever it was, and I'd bump up his yards per attempt for a quarterback or something, and then I'd go look, and he like barely moved in the rankings. But then if I upped his scramble rate or upped his touch or his or for a running back their carry share, whatever it is, they can move up and down the rankings so much more. The efficiency, unless you're making massive changes, which you probably shouldn't be, doesn't matter as much as a guy just getting more work. Particularly for running backs, we've known that forever. That volume matters more than anything else. So guys that are projected to have a lot of volume are probably safer bets than guys that you're making an efficiency bet on. It's just harder to move like if Devon Achane just goes off again in year 2, efficiency wise, that isn't as reliable as a guy that you just know is going to get the volume, like Jonathan Taylor or some of these other early, first, second round turn running backs around him. They're going to get the volume, and it's going to keep them where they are more than a guy's efficiency is, because it just doesn't move the needle as much.
I mean, we've been preaching that forever, volume over efficiency. And it's interesting you used a quarterback example talking about, you tweak yards per attempt and it barely moves the needle, when that's a position where efficiency matters like way more than it does at running back, wide receiver, tight end. But you see, fantasy analysts like hone in on for like a wide receiver targets. You're actually looking at it on a much deeper level. You're projecting out plays at the team level, which is so important. And I think for one player in particular, I don't know, ADP, a lot of people are just way off on Jayden Daniels in this Cliff Kingsbury offense and the number of plays they're going to be running, but we'll get on that a little bit later. Final question before we dig into what everyone wants, which is top values based on your projections. What are some process pieces that you struggled with the most when during the projections? What was especially difficult for you? I know we talked through projecting games played, what to do with that, maybe rookies in murky situations. What did you struggle with the most?
Yeah, games played is probably the thing that I've thought through over and over again, and probably flip flop back and forth on what I think. And ultimately, I think I like where I ended up on how to handle games played. I think there's multiple ways you can do this, and I don't think there's necessarily one way would be right or wrong. Like you could project every player to basically play a full healthy season, because you could say, I just want to know if they're all just healthy, what would the numbers look like? You're going to get a decent projection just as long as you frame your mind that you're looking at as this, like I'm projecting everybody to just be healthy. Then there's the flip side of where I'm going to, you could also just project things on a per game basis and not deal with games played, and kind of make everything balanced that way. I personally, what I ended up doing was, if a guy has shown that he can stay healthy for multiple years in a row, he's more or less going to play like 16 games for me, just shy of playing a full season. It's pretty much impossible to say any guy should project to play a completely healthy 17 games. Just on average, that's not going to be the case. I actually looked at quarterbacks. Like if you looked at the average games played for quarterbacks last year, for all the quarterbacks that played a certain number, I forget what threshold of dropbacks I used, it would have been like 9 games. but that's you wouldn't want to project every starting quarterback to only play 9 games this year. That wouldn't be right for sure. So for the most part, I'm projecting guys to play 15, 16 games unless they've shown a really good track history of staying healthy. Then maybe they can get to that 16 number. If they've shown a history that they just don't play healthy, or we know they're coming off an injury like Nick Chubb, T.J. Hawkinson, then they're going to be docked a few games. But that's tricky. I don't, like I said, I think there's other ways you could do it, and just depends on the way you're presenting the projections that it could be right. But for my process, I'm doing my best to project guys mostly to be healthy, unless they've shown a history to not be able to do that or be able to do that at a high level.
Yeah, I think this is something that like we just have to admit like no one knows anything about. Like
Right.
we're gonna have Edwin help, for TJ Hawkinson's number of missed games, he can more accurately project his timeline to return. But so, I mean, like what 2 years ago, Christian McCaffrey was the most injury prone player in fantasy, right? And like how many
Mm-hmm.
sites were projecting him at only 8 games that year, right? And he played basically the full season. I know the amount of work that goes into your projections, Chris. You've basically been working full time on nothing else since, I don't know, since the Super Bowl. But it was interesting to me when you told me that this was the thing keeping you up at night, in addition to your newborn baby, because it's like, is it just something you just like wash your hands of? No one really knows anything, but no, I like the methodology you went with. What was the other thing you struggled with in addition to this?
Yeah, just rookie projections in murky situations, and that's just a model. Whatever model you're doing, it only can work off of data that has happened already. So it doesn't know, a model doesn't know when Rome Odunze is added, a high talent level rookie is added to a already crowded receiver room. It has no way of knowing that Keenan Allen was the target leader for the Chargers, and now him, Odunze, and DJ Moore are all on the same team. It can only work off of data that it has previously happened. So you get these, particularly with so a guy like Keenan Allen's hard now because he's now probably the number 2 in an offense versus being the number 1. And then you throw in a rookie into that situation as well. So totally unknown target competition. And we don't have NFL data for this guy. I'm certainly looking at college data for these guys to get like a baseline, but college to NFL is just such a different game. You can't treat college data the same way you would treat NFL data in terms of how the model interprets it. So it's something you just kind of have, and that's where the art really comes from. You just have to have a feel for reading reports on camp stuff. What teams have done in the past with guys in similar situations, and that's really where the art part of this comes from. The model can only get you so far. Every single significant stat number, sacks, scrambles, yards, target share, all touchdowns, all of those numbers in my model have the ability to be manually adjusted because there's always going to be some level of manual art to this. There's no, I'm in disbelief that there's a model that you could just say run based off of previous season data and spit out projections for the upcoming season. There has to be an art to it.
What are some of the things you're doing to master the artistry element of it? I know you're what, like reading every single article a beat writer has put out all off season.
Maybe not everyone, but yeah, the Athletic, ESPN, some of the major sites that tabulate have good beat reporters and whatnot. That's a big part of it, and just looking for changes. I'll always be making tweaks leading up to the season, thinking through position groups better and stuff like that. But yeah, the big part is just staying up to news on all the reports and all that kind of stuff, and trying to pick out little tidbits of signs of depth chart positioning, guys maybe being more involved, looking healthier, whatever it is. That's a big part of it.
Let's get to what everyone wants, which is who are the top values based on your projections. And I hate to have to do this, but first, a word from our sponsors. You finalize your projections. They're up on the site right now. Who at the quarterback position stands out the most, or who are the top 3 most obvious values? And let's start with the first one. I'll just say the name, and we're aligned on it. It's Jayden Daniels. We just talked about some of the things that you've struggled with the most, which is projecting games played and rookie projecting rookies. And this player, I think, qualifies for both, because the counter argument I keep hearing is, oh, he's too skinny, he's only going to play 8 games, whatever. But according to Diana Rossini and based on Jayden Daniels' pro day, he's 5 pounds heavier, 5 to 10 pounds heavier than Lamar Jackson is right now. I know he did have an extensive injury history in college, but I don't know, like just projecting fantasy points per game. Let's say we don't know the total games, but just fantasy points per game. I don't know how this guy isn't the most obvious must draft value. What stood out to you, Chris?
Yeah, this is I tried everything I could to get Daniels not be as high in the rankings by the end of this, and it's just impossible. It's not. There's no world where Cliff Kingsbury is his offensive coordinator and he's not a top. I have him at QB7. I think that even could be a little low. Like I don't. It's a super tight tier there in the QB 5 to 8-ish range, but there's just no. I tried to dock his efficiency in basically every way: his yards per attempt, his touchdown rates. It's just the play volume is going to be there, and he's going to run. Kingsbury is let me look at the exact number here. He averaged 66 plays per game, both and both those seasons ranked inside the top 15 of plays per game over the past 3 seasons. Um, they're going to pass 60+% of the time. Daniels is going to scramble probably 15% of his dropbacks, something like that. Let me look at it. Yeah, or 10. I got him at 10%. So that's 4 extra rushing attempts per game before any design carry stuff. There's no world where I have him like bottom 7 in yards per attempt and touchdown rate for QBs, and he still is inside clearly in the top 10 for fantasy QBs this season. The only way this doesn't work out for him is if he, like you said, doesn't play enough games. But that's not something we're good at predicting. So I'm not going to say this guy's only going to play 8 games. Like you said, there's just, Bryce Young only missed like one game last year, and he's the tiniest QB ever. So we just don't know with Jayden Daniels, but the upside is massive for him.
Bro, he's currently the QB 11 by ADP. He's your QB7, and you've done everything you could to try and push him down, and still just won't budge. QB7 is the lowest you're able to go. To your point, Cliff Kingsbury, when he was head coach of the Cardinals, ranked first in situation neutral pace of play, first in no huddle rate, 4th in dropbacks per game. Also, Kyler Murray, 2020, 8.3 rushing attempts per game, 25.8 fantasy points per game. One of the biggest cheat codes there is find a quarterback who runs. Guess what? He runs. He was elite at that. And we know play volume is massively important. This is one of the best offenses for that, but it gets so much better than that. You have Jayden Daniels projected like 4th worst in yards per attempt, whatever you had. Chris, what if he's good? What if he's fucking awesome? Because he won the Heisman last year. He averaged 40 fantasy points per game, the second most by any Power 5 quarterback since at least 2016. 1.20 fantasy points per dropback, second best since 2014. What if he's really good?
The people had no problem with drafting Anthony Richardson for all these reasons last season, and this is just Anthony Richardson in a much better fantasy offense. I'm not going to say real life offense. I think probably the Colts offense is better than the Commanders, but fantasy wise, this is the same bet, but you're going to have more volume, more chances. And what if he's good? Like you said, I didn't do this on purpose at all. I just looked at the numbers after I did the projections. Kyler Murray's rookie season, he finished with 3,722 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, 544 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns. And I have Daniels projected for 3,539 passing yards. I don't think he's as good of a passer as Kyler, so that makes sense. 20 passing touchdowns, 649 rushing yards. He's definitely a better rusher than Kyler, and 4.4 rushing touchdowns. Like almost identical. Like there's no reason that Daniels shouldn't be able to hit that stat line if that's what Kyler's was his rookie year.
Yeah, that's incredible. I completely agree. that's what I said in my article. You brought up Anthony Richardson. In my article, I just wrote underdog quarterback values with Brian Heath. It's a free reroll of the Anthony Richardson bet, who was my Exodia must draft quarterback last year. Except now Anthony Richardson, you want to talk about a guy who might be injury prone. He's the QB5, all that's priced up, but to me, it's like the same exact bet, much better price. And so your second quarterback you're going to get to is another one we were fully aligned on. Who is that?
Yeah, so Joe Burrow he's in a super tight tier of like I said, that QB 5 to 8 range is definitely very tight, but it seems like he's being kind of priced at the back end of that tier, whereas he probably should be at the front. So if you looked at just his first, his entire season stats, all the efficiency numbers don't look great. They look like he regressed. Maybe his previous season numbers weren't as good as they should have been. But then if you look at just his last 5 numbers, he was down at 6.7 yards per attempt, but over his final 5 games, he was at 7.8 yards per attempt. Same thing with his touchdown rate. He's at a career 6% TD rate, but in 2023 it was down at 4.4. But if you look at the last 5, 6.1%. So all of these, he clearly was hampered by his coming back from injury earlier in the season. Finally gets healthy, takes those, what did he take, 1 or 2 games off in the middle of the season. He came back from that and was back to being Joe Burrow. And unfortunately gets hurt with the thumb, wrist injury, and then misses the rest of the season. But if you were strictly just looking at Joe Burrow's 2023 numbers, I could easily see how you make the mistake of under-projecting his efficiency. But then if you do look at the last 5 numbers, he's still Joe Burrow, and he's going to be efficient. And I don't see any reason that won't happen in 2024.
Chris, I had 2 must-draft quarterbacks in this article. It was Joe Burrow, it was Jayden Daniels, and for just about entirely the same reason. So, like, people forget how severely hampered that offense was by Burrow's calf injury. Brian Callahan talked about it, really constrained the offense. It shrunk the playbook. We had to live out of shotgun. We had to get the ball out as quickly as possible. If you just take out the first 4 weeks, and then you take out the game where he suffered that wrist injury, then he averages 23.3 fantasy points per game over his last 25 games. Only quarterback over their last 25 games to rank higher is Josh Allen. Also has hit at least 20.5 in each of the last 3 seasons. Only Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts can say that. And keep in mind how many games T. Higgins missed, Jamar Chase missed. This is an offense with a lot of pass volume. They just added a rookie I love. QB7 by ADP. I think that's absolutely stupid. Edwin's not worried at all about this wrist injury. I'm all in, fully aligned with you there. I don't think I am on your third QB though, but keep in mind from a rankings perspective, who is your third quarterback where you don't think where your projections are much higher than ADP based projections?
Yeah, this is a deep one, and I could totally get from a rankings perspective how you can't get there on this guy. QB in general is pretty aligned with my projection. It's the most projectable position. It's not surprising that there's not a ton of values. But Derek Carr seems like a pretty good value to me. He's QB 27 by ADP. I'm at QB 22. I think the only thing that's really keeping him down is people are afraid that he might get benched. He was certainly not a Super Bowl winning quarterback, but he wasn't terrible. He had the 16th highest yards per attempt last year, higher than Mahomes. He had the 13th highest passing TD rate. He's a very average quarterback, and he's gonna provide value strictly from an ADP perspective. But I totally could understand from he's not gonna win you your league either.
Right. From a rankings perspective, he's basically dead to me. It's just he doesn't have QB1 upside, which is all you care about in a 1 QB league. And then from a best ball perspective, even if he is an ADP beater, it's like he just doesn't have that spike week ceiling. Like he hasn't missed a game since 2021, and he's only cleared 23 fantasy points 4 times. Same as like Carson Wentz and like Joe Flacco and a bunch of backups who barely started. But from a projections standpoint, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I also I think we should be more excited about that offense in general. I really like the play caller change they made last year. Just they ranked like dead last in play action, in motion, in a lot of the key efficiency hacks that really move an offense. And I expect that to dramatically change this year. Pretty good weaponry. But let's move on to the running back position. And it looks like there's going to be a few more agreements as well. At the top of your list, Isiah Pacheco. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're right for the right reasons when you lay it out, Chris.
Yeah, so this is where my X's and O's background like almost hurts me because watching Pacheco run, yeah, he's fun to watch, but from an X's and O's, he looks like a nightmare on film. He is just running full speed ahead as soon as he gets the ball at the first hole he sees, and always watching him, I was like, this guy's just at some point he's going to fail in the NFL because he doesn't know how to read what hole he's supposed to hit. He just goes immediately and isn't afraid to just run into a guy because he thinks he can run everybody over. But doing the projections, I was just in disbelief of how this guy could, not be a top 10 running back this season, if not a top 5 guy. He finished out last season running 45% of the routes per team dropback. He was down at 26% the previous 3 seasons. He's been consistently around a 20% target per route run rate over his career. So that basically means he's going to see around 3.8 targets per game is what I have him projected for. He's a lock for 75% of the carries on a Patrick Mahomes-led offense. McKinnon's gone. They gave his jersey number to Xavier Worthy. He's not coming back. So you've got CH, Deneric Prince, Keontae Engram. I don't see how Pacheco doesn't see enough volume to be an awesome fantasy back this season, and he's RB11 by ADP. I haven't got him at RB7 currently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just in full agreement. We saw the offense just lean so much more run heavy. From the bye through the Super Bowl, he averaged 16.9 half point PPR fantasy points per game. That would have ranked 4th best. Like you said, there's no more, or there's lesser competition in that backfield with Jerick McKinnon not coming back. They gave his jersey number away to a rookie. And like people forget just like how heavily involved he was near the end zone. I think that's a great call. Who's the next running back on your list, Chris?
Next, I got Rhamondre Stevenson. I have him at RB15. He's RB20 by ADP. I don't quite get this one. We were all excited to draft this guy in like the 3rd round last year in best ball drafts, and then now he goes in round like 8. The only thing that's really changed is Antonio Gibson is there now, who is a guy that a lot other people also don't really like as a running back. I think he's actually a decent value too. And then they don't have Mac Jones at QB anymore. So the QB can't get really any worse. There's Drake May / Jacoby Brissett is going to make this offense better. They were at a 2% rushing touchdown rate per attempt as a team last year. Only 13 teams have posted a worse number over the past 3 seasons. I've got them up at like a 3% rate, so still below average, but some serious regression there nonetheless. That basically puts Stevenson at like half a touchdown per game, which would be, I think he was down at like 0.2, 0.3 rate last year. I might be a little bit bullish on his volume. He averaged 53% of design carries last season. I am at 65%, but I'm just not really sure where else the volume would go. I don't think Gibson's a high volume earner. JaMychal Hasty and Kevin Harris are on the roster, but neither of those guys have shown a reason to think they could take on a lot of volume. I don't get why Stevenson isn't in that the Josh Jacobs kind of tier this year.
So I'm with you. Again, I agree. I think there's a lot of things people are underrating. I think they're underrating just how bad this offense has been. It's been bottom 5 in first downs per game in each of the last 2 seasons. Listen, he was an uber elite freak bell cow in his from the second half on in his rookie season. I know injuries played a role with that, but it was like insane Christian McCaffrey level usage. He looked great. It's just the offense couldn't sustain drives, couldn't get near the red zone. And then last year, sure, he split work with Zeke, but it was still like a very valuable role for fantasy despite the offensive struggles. And then he was a bell cow to close out the season before he got injured. I think he had 22 plus touches in back-to-back games before that injury. And so like everyone's thinks it's just going to be like, oh, typical Patriots committee backfield. And I don't really know that. Like maybe is it Alex Van Pelt determining this? Like it could be. He was the running backs coach during Eddie Lacy's breakout season, and then he was the OC with the Browns. But we know it was the running back coach Stump Mitchell who determined running back play. Basically, just right now, it looks like at a bare minimum, he's a value if he's a committee back alongside Antonio Gibson, who I hate. And then there's a lot of upside beyond that. It's like, if he's better than Gibson, what if he's just the guy? Or what if the new regime favors that over and above a committee backfield? So great call. Last player you might need to sell me a little bit more on, just because I'm a Tyrone Tracy guy, but you have Devin Singletary listed here. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is probably another. I could see why you're not rankings high on him, but projections are going to like this guy. The Giants had a league average 3.7 yards per carry on design rushes last season. That was basically right in the middle, normal team. The year before that, though, they were a top 10 team in yards per carry and top 5 team in rushing touchdown per attempt. Granted, that's a lot of that is through Saquon Barkley, who we think is a pretty good running back. But as a team, they've been able to move the ball on the ground in recent years. So Singletary gets dropped in as the starting running back. The only thing behind him are 2 fifth-round rookies in Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray from the year before. And then besides that, Singletary hasn't been like an inefficient rusher in his career, whether he was on the Texans or with the Bills. He has a 4.5 yards per carry over the past 3 seasons. He had 4.8 yards per carry over his last 5 games with the Texans. He's going to get the work at least for as long as he's healthy. Like I don't think maybe Tyrone Tracy overtakes him, but they didn't invest a lot. We just don't see 5th-round rookie running backs take over all that much, especially not recently. We haven't. And then Singletary's like he's not a passing weapon, but he's going to probably see 3 targets a game minimum. The Texans didn't check the ball down nearly as much as the Giants do. I think the Giants were around 20% last year, and the Texans are more so down in like the 15% range. So he's a bet on volume.
One thing that I'd like to add to that to like bolster your argument is, let's not forget the Brian Dable connection. Here's a stat I pulled up. Over his last 25 games, postseason included, with Brian Dable, you want to guess what his snap share was?
It's probably 75-ish percent.
Yeah, 70%. I thought that was shocking. What was it, 2-3 years ago, if you include the postseason, he was on this like unreal tear, bell cow usage, scoring a lot of touchdowns. And even last year, if you look at games where Dameon Pierce, barely played or was out, or just from week 10 on, he was really productive. He helped us out in DFS quite a bit. So I don't love that, even though I'm rooting for my guy, Tyrone Tracy, to overtake him. One last word from our sponsors, then we're going to hit on wide receivers and tight ends. Really excited about this. So hold on just one second. Okay, Chris, first name on your list. So for a lot of the other players we had agreements on, and then I wrote up in my articles, it was like I was already, almost all the way there. And then seeing your conviction, I'm like, all right, I'm going all in. This player I forgot existed. You reminded me. And now I'm all in. He's one of my must draft best ball picks. Not a guy who's he doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside, doesn't have wide receiver 2 upside, but one of the best values in best ball right now. Chris, who is it?
It's Demarcus Robinson for the Rams. I have him at wide receiver 61. He's going I think he's like wide receiver in the 80s on Underdog. Massive value. I think he's probably my biggest value on the board among all the positions. I've been drafting him over and over on all my best ball drafts so far. He closed out the season with the Rams running around on 80% of the team's dropbacks and had a 20% target share. Like that's all you really need. Like done. You're not finding an 80% route share, 20% target share player in the 60s among wide receivers. They trade away Ben Skowronek. The only other notable wide receiver on the roster is Tutu Atwell, who has had multiple chances now to be a good player in that offense. And yeah, he's flashed at times, but he's not going to be that involved. The Rams offense is condensed. They don't throw to tight ends. They only throw to one running back, whoever the bell cow is that season. Demarcus Robinson is going to give you usable weeks multiple times this season as long as he's healthy. And I'm not betting on this, but like, what if Cooper Kupp isn't as healthy as we saw him not be healthy last year? What if he missed time? Then you're talking wide receiver, wide receiver 2 upside from a guy that you
Yeah.
drafted after 70 other wide receivers. That's huge value.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So let's not forget the Rams have led in percentage of plays under 11 personnel in each of the last 3 seasons, 94% of the time last year. Good quarterback. I think it's more valuable to be a wide receiver 3 on the Rams than for any other team. More valuable to be a wide receiver 3 on the Rams than wide receiver 2 on like a lot of teams. And he was awesome last year. Tutu Atwell had that role and did nothing with it. And then Robinson finally supplanted him in week 14, but he scored double digit in half point PPR, double digit fantasy points in each of his last 5 games. He averaged 6.8 targets per game. That's wide receiver 27 numbers, 13.5 fantasy points per game. That's wide receiver 18 numbers. He won me. He helped win me $25,000 in DFS last year. Big Demarcus Robinson fan, and I think you might even be a little too low on him. I think it's just that ADP is that bad on him right now. Chris, who is your second wide receiver?
So this guy, you ask anybody that's been doing projections long enough, and I think this guy is probably always undervalued. It's Christian Kirk for the Jaguars. For some reason, nobody ever wants to click this guy's name. I have him as wide receiver 22, underdog. He's currently wide receiver 30. So Calvin Ridley, and Zay Jones are gone, replaced with Gabe Davis and rookie Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, it doesn't really matter what you think of Brian Thomas Jr., but there's those two together are not the target earners that Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley were. So Kirk's volume is pretty much a lock to be the same, if not higher, than what it was last season. Gabe Davis has couldn't earn targets for the Bills, who have not near the receiving core that Jacksonville has. I've got Kirk projected for 7.8 targets per game, up from 6.8 in 2023. He's going to be a value again. He's an efficient player. Yeah, I think Christian Kirk is a good value this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. He was the wide receiver 15 by fantasy points per game, wide receiver 14 by yards per route run over his last 10 healthy games. Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones replaced by Gabe Davis. You know my thoughts on Gabe Davis. And then Brian Thomas Jr., who I was saying he's good. He's just really raw. 50% of his yards came on the go route. 75% if you just want to add one other route. So he's like very, very raw. But what is he? He's like a clear out option for Christian Kirk. Like he's not stealing targets away, but he's helping to bolster Kirk's efficiency. Jones and Ridley had 200 targets last year, and then Evan Engram led all tight ends in targets. He was tied with Garrett Wilson in catchable targets, I think 7th among receivers. And a large reason why was because they didn't have Kirk, who was the wide receiver 1 of that team. Quarterback, this doesn't go into your projections, Chris, but it goes into my head and I think about it constantly. QB rapport is real and matters. And it wasn't Calvin Ridley last year, but it was Christian Kirk, who was all over Trevor Lawrence's Instagram and his girlfriend's Instagram, going on double dates constantly. And so they got that going for them. So I'm with you on Christian Kirk as a value. What about the next wide receiver on your list?
One's a dual one because they are both values for the exact same reason, and it's Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, both for the Titans. So this is similar to Jayden Daniels. This is another team level boost. The Titans, Mike Vrabel's gone. Bring in Brian Callahan from the Bengals. The Bengals have run no less than 61.5 plays per game in the past 3 seasons. The Titans were down in the 58 plays per game each of the past 3 seasons. Not only that, the Titans' last 3 pass rates were 58%, 53%, 53%. The Bengals had pass rates of 66%, 65%, and 60% each of the past 3 seasons. So the Titans are pretty much a lock to just get to at least league average pass rate, whereas they've probably been in the bottom 5 the past 3 seasons. And then on top of that, the play volume is going to go up. And that 66% pass rate last year for the Bengals was without includes games without Joe Burrow. So it doesn't even matter if Will Levis isn't like awesome. Like Brian Callahan is going to at least give Will Levis the opportunity to win games, whether he's good or not. So it's not, in my opinion, we don't really have to worry about them trying to run the ball to win games. They do have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, but the Bengals had Joe Mixon and a bunch of other various backups over the years and never were a run first team. Um, so this is strictly a team level thing, and I don't think Ridley or Hopkins are. Maybe their Ridley isn't what he used to be. Maybe Hopkins is another year older and going to struggle. But volume trumps efficiency, like I said in the beginning, and we're going to see a big jump in that this year for the Titans.
Yeah, I don't know that I have solidified thoughts on this just because, I question the upside. I do worry about Will Levis. I think it's just something I personally need to dig in deeper, but I'm with you on this being an offense that looks undervalued for all the reasons you just described. And so it makes me think of one other player, Chris. What about Treylon Burks? Well, hold on. If you're playing in points per special team tackle leagues.
Oh
Are
man,
you right? What do your projections say? Like, did you just write him off as dead, or is he actually the wide receiver 3?
Oh yeah, he's definitely dead. I just don't. Let me check here. Yeah, I
No,
have him
no,
at
no.
1.5% target share. He's dead. Yeah, he's
Uh,
he
Brett
yeah
called.
he.
Boy, did Brett call that one.
Oh yeah, he definitely did.
All right. Well, what about the last wide receiver on your list?
Tyler Lockett, another guy always undervalued every single year, but by projections he's going to look pretty good. JSN did not eat into his playing time or his targets at all last year. You could argue that maybe JSN isn't what we all think he might have been coming into the league at this point. Um, but Lockett had a 22% target share, same as his 3-year target share rate of 22%. He hasn't shown a sign of taking a step back. Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach. I shouldn't say he's gone. They bring in Mike McDaniel, defensive-minded head coach, and then he brings in Ryan Grubbs, the Washington Huskies offensive coordinator. The Huskies average 66 and a half plays per game, 38 pass attempts per game. College is a little bit different, but those are still high marks for a college football team. They also produced 3 day 2 minimum receivers in Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, and Rome Odunze this year. There's no reason that Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN could all be fantasy producers in this offense, and Lockett is just the cheapest one. I have him at wide receiver 36. He's currently wide receiver 51 on Underdog.
So I really agree with this in best ball. And Start said, I don't know, just because career kind of looks like it's on a downswing, declining efficiency. You don't want to catch a falling knife that doesn't have too much upside. But from a best ball perspective, I just really, really agree. His price is the wide receiver 52 on Underdog. He finished as the wide receiver 32 last year. Before that, top 16 in 4 straight seasons. Really good. He's like of the better in best ball archetype. Only 4 wide receivers have more games with 26 or more fantasy points over the last 5 years. And here's a crazy stat. In 11 personnel last year, it was Tyler Lockett who had the highest target share at 22%, DK and JSN both at 20%. Although I do, given this play caller change, really like particularly JSN's upside, given Ryan Grubb and what he did with Jalen McMillan and just so much of JSN's personal disdain for the former OC. Where what was it? He was asked about Luke Getsy, and he said, "Is this on camera?" Oh, yeah, he's a nice guy. So I don't know, player I really believed in throughout the college, throughout based on my model. So he's probably more the one I want to bet on. Oh, by the way, sorry, Shane Waldron. What did I say? Luke Getsy. I meant Shane Waldron. My bad. All right. Tight end position. This is another player you really sold me on, and now I'm convicted. Who is it?
So first one I have is Evan Engram, tight end 5.
Whoa. That's not in the
Does that
sheet.
surprise you?
That's your number one. So I'm way more in agreement with your tight end too. Okay, carry on.
Oh, I see. I was looking at the wrong list. You're right. I did have a different guy as one in the show sheet, but Honestly, I like both these guys a lot. I'll touch Ingram's quick because it's basically all the same reasons that Christian Kirk was a value. But just to encourage people on Ingram, he even because I know Kirk missed games last year, and people might think that that's why Ingram did so well last year. But even when games Kirk played, Ingram still had an 80% route run per dropback rate, 20%, 21% target share. Really good numbers for a tight end. He's a little bit due for a touchdown regression. He had a 2.9% TD per target rate all of last season. Over the past 3 seasons, is at 3.6%. So he's definitely due to regress there. He started to at the end of last season. He got up to 6% in his last 5 games. But yeah, similar bet as Kirk with Evan Ingram.
To bolster your Engram argument. And so I struggle with this because initially, well, he really benefited from the absence of Christian Kirk. But like, as you highlighted, if you look at that, he's still a value regardless. If you look at his last 25 games, remember I did the same thing with Joe Burrow. Last 25 games and include the postseason, 8.1 targets per game, 60 yards per game, 14.4 fantasy points per game in PPR. That's basically, would have been the tight end one last year. Led the position in targets, would have been wide receiver 7 by catchable targets last year. And maybe this means nothing. Maybe it means something, but he led all tight ends in fantasy points week 13 on last year, and then ranked second the year before that. So who knows? Maybe he's just one of those guys who, like Zach Ertz was historically, who really pulls it out in those tournament weeks of the best ball format. I'm with you. I just like Ferguson more, but make your case for Ferguson.
Yeah, I don't get it. I think of all the content I've listened to or read this year, Ferguson seems like one of the most divisive guys out there. It seems like some people are on the fence of he's going to be awesome, which I think is the side that I would lean at, and then a bunch of other people are more on the like he's not that good, he's not that talented of a player. He was just, he just got ran hot with volume last year. But I mean, what more do you really need from a tight end that only has CeeDee Lamb, who's going to have a ton of volume, obviously, and then the next guy is Brandon Cooks, and then there's nothing else. There's nothing more at receiver. There's nothing more at running back. There's no other tight ends that are really a threat to him. There only Lamb and Cooks, or actually only Lamb saw more targets than Ferguson last season. Um, from weeks 10 through 17 last season, only 5 tight ends saw more targets than Ferguson. Like the volume is going to be there for Ferguson. And I didn't get the hate on like him being not a talent and like efficient guy. Like he went to drawing a blank of where he went. I think Wisconsin, and he was like kind of like a screen usage tight end, very similar to like an Evan Ingram guy in college. So I don't like he in college he was used as a guy they wanted to get the ball in his hands and let him do stuff. I don't see why he can't do that in the NFL. He's already shown that he can do that. He had a 1.5 yards per route run last season. That's a good number for a tight end. He is 7.8 yards per target is a good number. He had a 5% touchdown rate. That's a good number. Like, yeah, maybe he's not, Kelsey or Andrews or Laporta, but he certainly is in that like tier 1B, I think, for tight ends this year.
Yeah, so I just had to pull it up, but I liked Ferguson a lot coming out. Like I thought he was a pretty good prospect. He was a former 4-star top 5 recruit nationally. By missed tackles forced per reception in 2018 and 2021, ranked 5th and 6th best by any Power 5 tight end since at least 2014. Just a really run first Wisconsin Badgers offense, but really good market share metrics. And yeah, you look at what he did last year, massive touchdown regression candidate. He led all tight ends in red zone targets, ranked second in end zone targets, but 5-way tie for 7th place in total touchdowns. He's young, he's inexperienced, plenty of room for growth. And given that, not too unsurprising, he was at his best in the tail end of last season. Over his last 7 games, including the postseason, Ferguson averaged 12.5 underdog fantasy points per game, would have led all tight ends if over the full season. He had that massive spike week. What was it? Like 33 fantasy points in the playoffs. You know that he has that. that sort of spike week upside, which is important. But really, I think it just comes down to like basically what you said, which is, Dallas is probably going to lead the league in pass attempts this year, and they don't really have anyone else to throw to besides Lamb and Ferguson. I think that's all really I needed to say. So I'm with you.
There was one other thing about Ferguson. I want to the Cowboys run over 65 plays per game every year. They did it the past 3 seasons, but they're only about a 60% pass rate. We knew the Cowboys had a super soft schedule last season, so like that pass rate could come up, and that's not a high pass rate. So the passing volume could get even higher for the Cowboys this season.
I love it. Who's the last tight end on your list?
Last one, there wasn't a ton of tight end values, but this guy's technically a value late. I don't know if he's got league winning potential or anything like that, but it's Tyler Conklin, tight end 15 for me, tight end 21 on Underdog. He's seen 80 plus targets each of the past 3 seasons with some of the worst quarterback play imaginable. Aaron Rodgers is healthy. There's reports that Rodgers is building chemistry with Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin specifically. No one else was mentioned. They have Breece Hall, who's going to get a bunch of targets, but there's only so many backfield targets that are going to come out of an offense. Mike Williams is still recovering from the ACL tear. Lazard is being talked about as being used on special teams. Xavier Gipson and Malachi Corley are battling for wide receiver 3. So like Corley's not even a lock to like be the wide receiver 3 in this offense right away. So pretty much nobody outside of Garrett Wilson is going to have a higher target share than Conklin. Breece Hall could, but he's like I said, backfield targets there's only going to be so many of them in a season. And then he's a pretty big touchdown regression guy. He didn't score one last season. He has a 2.4% touchdown per target rate over the past 3 seasons combined. That's super low for a tight end. We just talked about with Ferguson. He's at like the over 5% range. So even if he gets to like a 3.5% touchdown per target rate, then like Conklin's going to pay off as a late round tight end for you.
Yeah, again, I'm in full agreement. I think this is one of the best ball values available right now. He's finished second on the Jets in receiving yards in each of the last 2 years. Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Dalton Schultz are the only other tight ends to see at least 85 targets over the last 3 seasons. Over that span, never finished worse than tight end 17. He's the current tight end 22 at cost. But really the big thing, so we just established tight end 17 as his floor. That's with Zach Wilson, who's awful. And now you throw in Aaron Rodgers in the mix. And I see easy low-end tight end 1 upside if Rodgers can be the Rodgers of old. But I think, now that we're done with, the specific player values, this kind of leads us into something interesting. I'm going to start asking you tough questions, Chris. What went into various decisions along with your projections process? And this is one for me is like, I'm a believer in the Jets. I like their Super Bowl odds. I'm a believer in Rodgers. I like his MVP odds. And it's really just, they had the best defense in football last year, at least top 5. They had the worst offense in football last year, at least bottom 5. Zach Wilson is so bad. Aaron Rodgers, if healthy all year, people forget, he was playing with a broken thumb to his throwing hand for the near entirety of 2022. Before that, won MVP in back-to-back seasons. I see for a player like Tyler Conklin, for a player like Breece Hall, for a player like Garrett Wilson, going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers could be worth 4.20 fantasy points per game. It could be worth 69 fantasy points per game. What is the actual number there, Chris? What are we looking at?
So I've got Rodgers. Check his efficiency numbers. So Rodgers is typically in the 7.8 yards per attempt range. I've got him at 7.4 yards per attempt this season. Little dock there just for playing on a new team technically because he missed all of last year, coming back off of the injury. I've got him at a 5.1% touchdown rate, and compared to he's normally in like that 6% range most years. That could certainly come up. Rodgers is not the easiest guy to project just with so many variables of coming off the injury and being on a new team. but yeah, there's no, with the numbers that I have. I mean, I've got Brees Hall as my RB3, but barely behind Bijan. They're basically neck and neck. Garrett Wilson is my wide receiver 9. So ahead of guys like, yeah, ahead of Chris Olave, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr., DJ Moore. So yeah, there's no doubt there's a big, increase in efficiency for all the major skill players in this offense.
What about volume? Because it's, you have Aaron Rodgers instead of Zach Wilson, you get more sustained drives. So maybe more plays, or maybe it's just that, you know, you're not forced to score as many points. You can lean on your defense. You can go more run heavy, and then it bolsters Brees Hall, who like was so screwed over last year. I think like average point differential when he was on the field is like minus 4.8. Just zero, like the fewest like team red zone carries per game of like any offense in like a decade. And all that you have to think gets better, but then there's another trade-off. It's like, well, he was really good when trailing because he was peppered with targets. Do you have any thoughts on that, sort of the interplay between efficiency and volume?
The volume, actually, I don't think is. If anything, I'm leaning more towards that the volume, the overall play volume is going to come down a bit with their not having to rush to play behind. So they were at 62 plays per game last season, 63 the season before that. Those are pretty high numbers for a team. They were just bad on those plays, so they were running a lot of plays, but then just ended up punting or whatever at the end of drives. So I actually have the play volume coming down a bit. The pass rate, they were super high in pass rate every year, which makes sense because they were always trailing 66% last year, 64% the year before that, 65% 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But their pass rate over expectation is only like 1% every year. So it's not like they were passing. They were passing because they were down, because they were a bad team. So I have the pass rate coming down a bit, assuming that if they are leading, they haven't shown that they want to be a super pass heavy team. I got it at 63%, so still pretty high, but not as high as it's been. So all the volumes, which is probably why guys like Brees and Garrett Wilson aren't like the top of their position groups, because I expect the volume to come down, but all the efficiency numbers come up, and it's just a matter of how high does those touchdown rates get.
Yeah, all right. That makes sense to me. A few more tough questions, and this one, because I don't know, maybe I disagree with it. I've kind of gotten lazy on Twitter and just throwing out hot takes, and one of them was that I don't know that you're gonna hate this, Chris. I don't know that uh, the Giant, like the Malik Nabers landing spot to the Giants isn't just as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. to Arizona. I think you hate that because partly you have Marvin Harrison Jr. with a higher projected target share than Nabers, which is one of my reasons. I assume Nabers would be much higher. But what are your thoughts on that hot take, and why do you have it the way you have it?
First of all, let's set it straight. I've got a 26% target share for Harrison and 25% for Neighbors. So it's not a huge gap.
Right, but
But
then you factor
two,
in quarterback play and like
yeah, yeah.
projected catchable target share, right? It's like night and
Oh,
day.
sure. Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, I didn't realize how close I actually had them until you put this question in our show sheet, and I was looking, and I didn't change anything yet, but I think I want to look a little closer at this. I think you do have an argument for Neighbors being a little bit ahead. Just as an example, like I've got Darius Slayton at like a 15% target share because that's where he's more or less been every year of his career. Um, I think Hyatt's number is fine. I've got him at 12%, Wandale Robinson at 17%. I could see myself taking, 1 or 2% from both Slayton and Robinson and giving that to Neighbors to push him over Harrison. I think just what most likely happened initially is the Cardinals don't really have anybody. They don't have any other target earners. I think it's Harrison, and then it's McBride, and then like the next closest guy is some combination of Michael Wilson and Zay Jones at like 12 or 14%. Whereas the Giants have all these other guys that could, have gotten playing time in the past because they just haven't had receivers and could have good target shares again. The one knock I will put towards Nabers is the Giants have thrown to their running backs a lot more. They've thrown to their running backs around 20% of the time, and the Cardinals are down at like the 15% range. Kyler just hasn't really targeted running backs. Yeah, like I said, I think might have an argument there of how Nabers' target share could be, which makes me feel a little bit better because my ranking currently has Nabers a little bit lower than ADP, and I haven't felt great about not having like any Nabers exposure so far.
All right, let me lay out my argument, and keep in mind for the folks at home, this is what Chris and I are going to do over the next 3 weeks. We just thought it'd be fun to kind of air it out publicly before we get into that. Here's my Nabers argument. So you just mentioned Giants targeting running backs an above average rate. I would put that on Saquon Barkley being really good pass catcher and not having any receivers. So a downgrade there. Dable, I think, historically targeted running backs at one of the lowest rates in Buffalo. You mentioned Slayton. I'm okay with Slayton. I think he's a little underrated, but even if he is really just primarily like a deep shot only guy. But then Hyatt is like really that. I was very low on him when he was coming out. I know he was highly drafted. I really don't think he does much beyond just the go route, and you might have to scheme it a little bit. Wandale, I was very high on coming out, but have since soured. Like, how many times have we he's the top value in DFS that week, and he does get his 8 or 9 targets, but only once in his career has he cleared 55 receiving yards in a game. And he did that despite like really good usage, like plenty of screens, plenty of manufactured touches, plenty of targets against linebackers and coverage. And so to me, on this Giants offense that Darren Waller retired, by the way, and I was high on Waller heading into last year, in part because the beat writers are like, Daniel Jones is just locking onto this guy. Like, Darren Waller has a 70% target share in practice. Is he could be the wide receiver 1 for this team, but he could also be everything that Wan'Dale Robinson is at a much higher level. So he's like being a true wide receiver 1 in the same way Marvin Harrison Jr. would be for Arizona, but then he's also getting a ton of screens because he was so good at that in college. He was getting slot fades because he was so good in that college, the targets against linebackers. So he gets the manufactured Wandale role plus, a typical 6 to 7 targets per game. That's my hope. That's my dream as a Giants homer. Chris, I haven't had any fantasy eligible player to get excited about, so I'm trying to get excited about Nabers. Ultimately, what do you think? You're gonna take a deeper look at this, or I mean, you still think Harrison smashes Nabers, right? And probably neither is a value at ADP.
I think you have an argument for Nabers seeing a larger target share than Harrison, but I think ultimately Nabers' efficiency is not going to be what Harrison's is. But that's not a knock on Nabers; it's a knock on the Giants' offense versus the Cardinals' offense.
Right. My thing was like, that just doesn't matter if you get 4 screens a game and you get a 40% of your targets come against linebackers and you're living in the slot 80% of the time. But one, that's like a lofty projection. And 2, like the overall state of the offense is more important to your credit. Next tough question. And it's a tough question, I know, because it's a tough question for me, is Devon Achane the most glaring regression candidate ever? And then does it matter for fantasy?
Yes, he's a regression candidate from a efficiency perspective, but I think there's a volume increase there to offset it enough. So I have him up to a 45% carry share versus 35% last season, and I have him running the most running back routes on the team. He's my RB11, which is right around where he's going. So I guess he would, if you look at his per game number, he was probably higher than RB11 last season, but RB11 finish for him this year would not be a terrible finish, given where he's being drafted. But yeah, he's not going to run for 7.8 yards per carry again. I have him at 5.2. He's not going to his touchdown rate of 7.8% is high, but it's not necessarily super high for the offense because Mostert is up at 8.6% last year. I've got them both in like the 5% range, which is more like historically average for running backs, but was still a boost because of the offense. He's not going to, his receiving numbers are like, yeah, he shouldn't really regress there. He's 5.5 yards per target. Is 1 point, yeah, I have him at 1.2 yards per route run. That's right around where he was last year. I'm at a 20-ish% targets per out run. That's doable for a running back. So his receiving numbers don't really need to regress. It's just really just the rushing efficiency that I am from a projection standpoint or have coming down a little bit. But I don't think it matters that much. I think there will be enough volume to offset it, and then he definitely still has the ceiling upside of what if he is just the guy and Mostert can't stay healthy this year. Jalen Wright isn't that involved. Maybe I know Achane said he's put on muscle weight to help him stay healthy. But you kind of have to you can't just say that that's going to be what's happened. You got to factor in that Achane's still a small guy. Like maybe he gets banged up and isn't as efficient for those reasons. So it's definitely a mix, but there's no denying that the upside is there. But I like I said, I don't think the efficiency is a killer for him.
Right. So this is basically what Ryan, Heath, and I came up with. We looked back at, like the top 20 running back or top 10 running backs with similar efficiency over the last decade. And what happened the following season in just about every instance is, yeah, the efficiency came way down, volume went way up. And those players, like especially when this hyper efficient season occurred early in their career, those players become superstars. It's like the Alvin Kamaras of the world. Why? Because like if you're that efficient, chances are you're probably really good. The offense is like going back, watching over last season's film, and is like, yeah, we need to get this guy more touches. And then you also brought up him putting on more muscle and more weight. This is my knock on him coming out was just his BMI was so low that I didn't think he would ever be a running back who can command more than a dozen touches per game in the NFL. And, he did get hurt last year, couldn't stay healthy. But Danny Kelly's point, and I think he was ultimately right, was like, you're neglecting the fact that he was a track superstar in college, well above and beyond even what Tyreek Hill was. And that made it so like he could never put on weight. And this offseason, he finally has, maybe to withstand a larger workload. Although we know Mike McDaniel kind of favors a committee backfield, trust Achane. But yeah, this is one of the players I struggled with the most, the potential to absolutely break leagues this year. Another player I really struggle with is, this is tough, Chris, Cooper Kupp. What the heck do you do? Do you just entirely throw out last season? Does he still have the upside to break leagues like he did a few years ago? Cooper Kupp has said multiple times this spring that he's finally back to 100% health for the first time in multiple years. Sean McVay told reporters that the public has no idea exactly how much Kupp was playing through last season. I get that the numbers were so bad last year and they weren't that good the year before that, or at least they were trending down. And so it's like, me as the ranker is like, with Puka there, does he still have like, he's going wide receiver 20 by ADP? Could he still finish top 6? Could Puka and Kupp both finish top 6? Or do we think he's dead or declining? And I just have no idea, but it keeps me up at night. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I don't think both Puka and Kupp could both finish like top 6. I have Puka as wide receiver 6, ironically, right now, and I've got Kupp at wide receiver 17. So, and remember, that's like the average outcome. That's what I think on average is the most likely outcome. Um, but I don't. You definitely can't totally throw away a full season's worth of data. We always you got to remember we only get like, or at least most teams, we only get 17 game samples every single year. You can't just say I'm throwing out that season. You can certainly. I mean, there's all obviously that's where a model can't. When I was talking earlier, you got to be able to do manual adjustments because a model doesn't know if a guy is hurt or not and how severely they're hurt. So yes, I'm not throwing out 2023 for Kupp, but I don't even think the numbers were as bad as what you kind of made him sound like. Like he still had a 25% target share over the whole season, 26% to close out the year. I've got him right at 26% this season. slightly behind Puka. Puka was just very good, so it's hard to take stuff away from Puka. Um, I've got his yards per target at 8.3. He was at 8 last year, so I have that coming back up. He was at like 9.3 over the course of the last 3 seasons. So yeah, that the efficiency definitely came down last year. And then the touchdown rate, I've got him leading the team actually at 5.4%. That's what he was at last year. He closed out the season at 9%. So when he was theoretically the most healthy. But yeah, I'm not throwing it away, but I definitely think Kupp still has an incredible upside, but I don't see a world where he overtakes being the wide receiver one from Puka again, just because of how awesome Puka was. You know, you would probably know better than anyone when we see a rookie come in the N+1 year of the next year when they're that awesome. Like those guys just don't disappear. They don't not repeat what they did last year in some fashion.
Yeah, yeah. I want to clarify. He was good for fantasy. It's just like some of the efficiency metrics. Jacob Gibbs has done a really good job. Um, when not used as pre-snap motion, uh, averaged 1.66 yards per route run. Um, First downs per route run was like half what it was in any other season of his career. What was the other stat? I think it was on the perimeter and man coverage. He was like bottom 5 of any player. And, those are different variables. Maybe it's not as useful to go that deep into it, but certainly at the very least, like efficiency trending down, even if volume was good and like Puka kind of blew him away. But yeah, it's just uh, weighing those pros and cons. It's tricky. Um, Last question I have for you before we wrap up here. Um, what do you do with Javonte Williams? If you listen to Dov Kleiman, he's already been cut. He's not on the team anymore. If you listen to John Proctor, he might be this year's, what was it, 2022 Josh Jacobs. What do you think?
I'm definitely on the Josh Jacobs potential side of things. Like I think you're crazy if you think Jaleel McLaughlin's going to lead this team in carries in any way, shape, or form. The McLaughlin over the last 5 games had 18% of the carries. And in that same span, Javonte had 50. You're telling me that Sean Payton just now this season is saying, nah, we don't need the guy that had 50% of the carries, and then we're going to give it to the guy that only had 18%. They drafted Audric Estime, which why wouldn't Sean Payton like him more than Jaleel McLaughlin? I don't know. He could. P. Ryan's technically still there. I know a lot of people think he's going to be cut, so that could help some of these guys get a little bit more carries. But I don't see a world where Javonte doesn't lead this team in carries again. There's been multiple reports at this point of Peyton specifically pointing out how much better Javonte looks now that he's 2 years removed from the injury that we all said would take 2 years for him to get back. Yeah, maybe he's not the most efficient runner. If I could bet that Jaleel McLaughlin is the more efficient runner this year than Javonte, I would 100% agree with you. But like we started this whole conversation, volume ultimately matters way more than efficiency, and Javonte is going to have the volume over McLaughlin, P. Ryan, Estime, whatever other running back.
Yeah, yeah. I think 3 weeks ago I was projecting 55% of the carries for Javonte, 45% for Estime, the rest to Jaleel. Um, just like vibes look so bad at the time, but if you dig into it, it's really just like 1 to 2 beat writers, and then one clip from Peyton that was taken out of context when he was really primarily talking about the rookies. But he's like, "Oh, we're going to have a ton of competition here," but really think he was just primarily talking about the rookies, and then but like beyond that, he like barely mentioned Javonte's name, which is like a red flag to me. But like you said last week, he was heaping a bunch of praise on Javonte. He was like, "Yeah, this is the typical timeline of that injury where you struggle the first year, but year 2 is where you turn it on." And Javonte looks great. We have a lot of faith in him and belief in him, and yeah, and so now maybe that I'm leaning more towards that Jacob style argument, where before I was a little more excited about Estime, a player I liked. I also like Blake Watson. But yeah, Jaleel McLaughlin, like his size. I mean, he could be the Darren Sproles Reggie Bush in the offense, which, but even then, don't see a lot of carries going his way, and it's still a projection. I think that's all I got. We're going to continue this probably off screen, you and I, Chris. We're going to have some debates. We're going to dig into the numbers. We're going to try and make sure our projections are perfect. I will say the industry leader over the past few years has been Derek Hardy of the Blitz, and I think we're going to take him down, Chris. I'm really excited about it. I think we're going to have the best projections in the industry this year. I'm really excited about it. I want to thank you so much for your brilliance and your hard work in fine tuning this and your perfectionism. You have any closing thoughts? Anything you want to say to the folks at home? Any final takes you want to get out there?
No more takes. Just that, yeah, we're gonna. I'm definitely a perfectionist when it comes to this stuff. And we're gonna rival the best in the industry, if not take it down, like you said. We've already done it for UFL for 2 years in a row now. It's inevitable at some point. We're gonna have industry leading NFL projections for sure.
Let's do it. I love it. Chris, thanks for coming on.
Thanks.